Good evening. My name is Jason Carmel, and I have the honor of serving as the director of the Weinberg Family Cerebral Palsy Center. Thank you for joining us for the 7th annual Marilyn Lindenauer lecture about cerebral palsy and disability rights. To tell us about the lecture series, we are delighted to have Debbie Weinberg, who with her husband Peter founded the center and serves as the chair of the board of advisors. Debbie will introduce her parents, Dr. and Mrs. Lindenauer.
Hi everyone, I'm Debbie Weinberg, and I am so pleased to be here with my parents, Marty and Marilyn Lindenauer, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, to have the chance to thank them for endowing the Lindenauer Lecture, which began 7 years ago. Mom and Dad have always been great believers in the power of education, so it's only fitting that they provided the support for this lecture series, which aims to bring great leaders, researchers, clinicians, advocates in the CP world to talk to us about the incredible work they are doing. So thank you, Mom and Dad, for your generous support so early on in our efforts. We've all benefited tremendously. Mom, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Debbie. Hello, everyone. We're sorry that we aren't able to be together for this wonderful event, but we're very excited about what Dr. Carmel and the entire team at the Weinberg Center have put together for us today.
And we are here and pleased and proud to support the work of the center. The center works to improve the lives of people with cerebral palsy. And we want to thank our inspiring speakers today. We are very excited to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We advance the mission of the Weinberg Family CP Center to improve the lives of people through clinical care, through research, education, and advocacy. For this year's lecture, we focus on advocacy for civil rights. The urgency of civil rights has been made palpable this year by the pandemic and the rising consciousness of racial injustice. Today, we address the intersection of civil rights and cerebral palsy using the context of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which turned 30 years old this year. I'm delighted to moderate the discussion between two leading disability rights advocates, Denise Sherer Jacobson and Cara Liebowitz. Denise Jacobson is an author, advocate, and disability historian based in Oakland, California. She's the author of a memoir chronicling her life as a mother with a disability and has published extensively on disability issues and other topics. In 2015, she was the subject of New York Times online photo essay. She's the story consultant for the acclaimed Netflix documentary Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution, as well as a featured personality in the film. Cara Liebowitz is an activist and writer based in Washington, D.C. She's the development coordinator for the National Council on Independent Living. Cara also works as a freelance writer and reader to determine sensitivity to the disability perspective. Cara's work has been published in a wide array of online and print outlets. She's an active member of the DC Metro chapter of ADAPT, a national organization of programs and services for people with disabilities. Thank you to everyone who has submitted questions for our guest lecturers in advance of today's events. Many of them will be addressed during the discussion. You may also send us questions by using your Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Among the many milestones this year in civil rights was the 30-year anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, this enabled people with disabilities to have access to employment, to healthcare accommodations, access to public services such as transportation, and also to businesses that were open to the public. And this has been a landmark in the civil rights of people with disabilities. And today we're going to take a look at where we've been for people with CP and also where we're going. So for Denise Jacobson, what were the expectations that you grew up with as a person with CP?
first I want to say how thrilled I am to be here. Thank you for inviting me. What was the life? So I grew up in the 50s and 60s when there were no public accommodation. I went to a segregated health conservation unit from kindergarten to 8th grade. And we had no contact with the non-disabled kids in our public school. They kept us in the basement. When I went to high school at 14, we were in a special class for homeroom, but those of us who were able went into regular classes. I always had to prove my ability. There was and there still is a disability hierarchy, and if you had CP, you were at the bottom of the hierarchy because you were always suspect. People would think if you had CP, you were cognitively disabled, or if you had your disability affect your speech, people thought that you had an intellectual disability.
That sounds like very challenging. What about before we move on to Cara? What about the ADA changed your life?
When the ADA broadened my world, it made things more accessible. There were more opportunities for independence to live on my own, to use public transportation, more opportunities for employment, and to be out in the world. I found that the more I was out in the world and people saw me, they got used to seeing people with disabilities.
I think that visibility issue is enormous. So Cara, even before we invited you to be the speaker here, you called yourself a post-ADA baby, I guess, when you were born. Tell us about sort of what you see as the inheritance of the post-ADA generation.
Yes. So I am 28 years old. I was born in 1992. So I was part of the first generation that was born after the ADA was passed. And so I think that gives me a bit of a unique perspective. I've never known a world where I didn't have civil rights. And that's a little bit sad to say if you think about it, because there was a time when my civil rights as a disabled person, and particularly as a disabled woman, were not guaranteed. And it is something that I took for granted growing up, that I still, every once in a while, catch myself taking for granted. I didn't know the ADA even existed until I was in about 5th or 6th grade, and I did an enrichment project. And my mother suggested doing it on the ADA. We had to do it on some aspect of the Constitution or law, and she suggested the ADA, and I made a little pamphlet about what the ADA was all about, and I made stickers up that said I support the ADA to give out, and it was really my first experience with the ADA and realizing that there was a law in place that protected my civil rights as a disabled person. I think in contrast to Denise, there were extremely high expectations for me growing up, particularly because I was academically gifted. I did go to a segregated preschool for children with disabilities as an outgrowth of the early intervention I received after my CP diagnosis. But from kindergarten on, I was totally included with my non-disabled peers. And I was always expected to go to college, get a job. I never questioned that any of those would happen. I started questioning later on how they were going to happen, but I never questioned that they would happen. The downside of being kind of a post-ADA person, being someone with CP growing up after the ADA, is that I didn't meet many other people with disabilities until I was in my teen years. And I credit those experiences mainly to the Southampton Fresh Air Home, a sleepaway camp for children with physical disabilities on Long Island. And I think people have this expectation that children with disabilities aren't going to notice they're different. I noticed, I knew I was different, and my parents were very open with me about my CP. I think I could pronounce the word cerebral palsy spastic diplegia by the time I was in kindergarten. And so I knew, and even I've talked to people who didn't know their diagnosis growing up, whose parents were not open with them, and even they said they knew they were different. And I knew I was different, and I knew that I didn't fit in and that physically things were harder for me. And it was very lonely at times, especially when you get into the kind of middle school years and you see your peers kind of passing you by. And so we need to really be sure that in the wake of the ADA and other wonderful, incredible civil rights laws for people with disabilities, that we don't lose sight of the fact that people with disabilities need to meet and be with and be mentored by other people with disabilities, that children with CP and with other disabilities have the opportunity to meet other people like them. And there's something really special about looking at someone and seeing them move like you, especially if you haven't had that experience before. And I want to be sure that while inclusion and integration are wonderful things, that we don't lose sight of disability community.
We grew up in the era of civil rights and that Vietnam protest. So we began seeing that people wanted racial equality and women's liberation.
I think it's a critical message about how the intersection of the various civil rights movements.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And just to add on that super quickly, I know we're on a little bit of a time crunch, but I do want to recognize the relative privilege I think that both of us have as white women. I want to shout out and uplift, you know, the people of color who have been doing this work, who have been fighting for disability rights. Again, both in Denise's generation and mine, even in the disability rights movement, the organizers that you see are mainly white. And I want to take a minute to acknowledge our privilege, you know, and recognize that the movement still has a long way to go in terms of racial justice.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you recognizing that important aspect. Denise, I want to turn our attention to healthcare. And I was wondering what your experience was growing up with doctors and with medicine, and how that might have changed around the ADA.
Well, there was always a push for me to be as independent as I can. So there was a lot of PTOT speech that would be, no matter how much therapy I had. Once I became an adolescent, the medical support was almost non-existent. It felt like I've gone as far as I could go, and now I was on my own. You know, I find that most general practitioners do not know a lot about CP and stuff. They really didn't know what to do with me. I was the one who had to ask for diagnostic tests because they really didn't know. You know, it was a medical problem or a cerebral palsy problem, and it could have been both, you know. But the ADA really started to help open up medical services making offices accessible.
Well, I think one of the things we try to do at our CP Center, I think others, is to try to address those gaps that you just articulated, the lifespan care for us certainly, and also the lack of knowledge among either general practitioners or specialists, including OBGYN. So, Cara, what about from your perspective? How has the medical world accommodated or not accommodated people with CP?
Yeah, so I think Denise brought up a lot of great points, and I identified with a lot of her points, which just goes to show how much farther the medical establishment really has to go. You know, I don't think it was as much of an issue when I was a kid. First of all, because CP is seen as a pediatric diagnosis and disability. So I think pediatric doctors are more likely to be familiar with CP. And also because obviously I always had my parents to advocate on my behalf. As an adult, I found it very difficult, especially now that I live independently in a completely different state from my parents. So it's really up to me. There's no one else. I found it very, very difficult to access both routine and specialty medical care. Doctors are not educated on what CP is or how it affects people. The ADA has been great about making buildings accessible, and I can usually get into a medical building, but the exam rooms are usually a little trickier, and there's not always room for my wheelchair in an exam room. And as an ambulatory wheelchair user, I have been forced to leave my extraordinarily expensive wheelchair out in the hall and walk into the exam room because there's no room. And doctors and nurses and techs all get very flustered when that happens. And doctors don't understand how my CP affects my body and how it might affect how I experience other medical conditions. I think Denise touched on this a little bit. I think there's also a tendency to ascribe any sort of issue that ever crops up to CP. I have several other disabilities, including ADHD and anxiety, OCD, and asthma, in addition to my CP. And none of those were picked up on when I was growing up. I had to seek out diagnosis as an adult when they started interfering with my life. And I think part of the reason was because everybody was so laser focused on CP that they automatically just thought any issues I had were because I had CP. And doctors don't understand how my CP might affect how I experience other medical conditions. I had trouble using a steroid inhaler for my asthma because it requires a fair amount of coordination of your breath and your hands at the same time. And I was just having trouble, and CP is one of the most common physical disabilities. The amount that medical professionals don't know about CP when it's such a common condition is frankly kind of scary. And that's not even touching accessing care for CP. As I've gotten older, I've experienced a lot of chronic pain, like most people with CP. And accessing care for CP is nearly impossible as an adult. I got bounced around from physiatrist to orthopedist to you name it. I'm involved in a lot of CP groups on social media and things like that. And I see people all the time asking, where can I find a doctor that specializes in CP, that knows things about CP? And they say, I'm in California, or I'm in DC, or I'm here, or I'm there. And all of us go, you can't, just go to Weinberg Center. It's amazing what Weinberg Center has been doing. And I hope it serves as a model for other centers around the country, because it shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't just be one center in New York City that has doctors that actually understand CP.
Thank you for that. I want to sort of wrap up by focusing on the future and what the barriers are that you see. You know, what now that we've had this landmark legislation now 30 years, what are the things that what are the barriers that we still have to pull down? Denise, do you want to start us?
So one thing is that we have to get CP and disability back into the medical curriculum because students are not being taught. I know they've been streamlining the medical curriculum and so they cut out a lot of classes around disability. I also think there's still a stigma around disability, and that can't be legislated. That's more of an attitude issue. If you look at issue, we need to start having conversations with parents, with people with disabilities, and start networking and saying it's okay, there's nothing wrong about having a disability. It's part of life for everybody. I also think that there could be more collaboration between the medical community and the disability community. It's really an opportunity if more pre-med students would get personal experience with people with disability to really see what everyday life is like. That it would be an opportunity not only to gain insight, but to gain a vast amount of knowledge about what it's like to be disabled. And I think we should all benefit.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think, you know, that experience can be formative, you know, at many stages, whether in school, as we talked about before, or in your professional development, and certainly early makes a big impression. Cara, do you have some thoughts about the barriers that still exist and how you would address them?
Oh, you know I do. There are so many things that the ADA has made possible and made easier for us, and it is a landmark law. The ADA paved the way for me and for so many others, but we still have such a long way to go. The ADA needs active enforcement. Currently, there is no government agency or task force dedicated with enforcing the ADA. The ADA is reactive. So a business or a building, you know, can be violating the ADA for years on end, and they won't be penalized for it unless and until somebody files a complaint, which is not a process that's easy to do or accessible to everybody.
People need to understand the value of the ADA. That it doesn't only help people with disabilities, it helps society. It helps us become more inclusive, more diverse, and more compassionate, and it improves everybody's life.
Yeah. And just from a practical standpoint, you know, every time you go up and down a curb cut, every time you take the elevator, every time you use the automatic door button, that's because of the ADA. And take a minute to thank the activists who fought for the ADA, like Denise, and like so many others, because the ADA is not a law that's sprung up out of nowhere. It's not something that, you know, government decided to do out of the kindness of their hearts for, you know, the poor, pitiful, disabled people. It's something that people fought for, and that we're still fighting for. You know, so people with disabilities fought for the ADA. People with disabilities are still fighting for the ADA and for more legislation and better legislation, you know, and more opportunities, better opportunities. So I think the point that the ADA helps all is really important to make. You know, in a perfect world, people would care about the ADA just because it helps disabled people. But unfortunately, the world does not work like that. So, you know, I think pointing out how the ADA really benefits all is really an important point to make.
Thank you so much to Denise and to Cara for being our Lindenauer lecturers. We're very happy that you've chosen to come back and do the questions and answer period so that people in the audience can hear more from you.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
So thank you to everybody who's submitted questions. We'll try to get to as many as possible. The first one is to you, Denise. And this is advice for medical professionals. What is one thing that you would like to see improved in the medical system?
Well, two things. I think it's important not to miss assumption, and it's important to allow yourself to think outside the box. For example, the first couple times I had an MRI, it was a disaster because, as you know, the more you try to be still when you have CP, the more you move around. Sometimes I can't even get a good MRI reading. Later on, when I became a mother, and I had to have an MRI, I thought, well, what did I do for kids who need MRIs? And I thought that probably sedate them. So that's what we did. And it was much better for me than takes didn't get all freaked out and you get an MRI that really showed what it needed to show.
Well, I think it's safe to say that in your presentation, both you and Cara have sort of hopefully disrupted assumptions about people with CP. And I agree that, you know, with a little bit of more understanding of the condition, your experience in the MRIs and other things would have gone a lot smoother. So for you, Cara, what can the health system do to be more supportive of the disability rights movement, particularly for people with CP?
First of all, I want to say how thrilled I am to be here. And I believe this is the first Lindenauer lecture actually featuring speakers that have CP. So I'm honored to be a part of it. I'm honored to be here, and thank you to Dr. Carmel and to the Weinberg team for inviting me, and to Denise for being such a wonderful conversationalist and now a friend. So I think the health system can play a huge role in advancing disability rights and dispelling stigma from day one of a diagnosis. You know, I think they have a role to play in showing and telling parents of newly diagnosed children with CP that CP is not a terrible thing, that a disability is not a tragedy, that if you have CP, your life is going to look a little different, and yeah, it's going to be a little harder, but it's not something to mourn over. And I think doctors can reach out to people with CP, give parents resources from people with CP and organizations that serve people with CP and other disabilities. You know, beyond that, I think the health system just needs to be open-minded and think outside the box and ask us how we experience certain things, or what positioning is most comfortable for us, or how we want to do certain things. You know, and don't be uncomfortable with it. I find doctors get very uncomfortable when they're trying to ask me why I use a wheelchair. You know, just be flexible. I think that's the message.
Terrific. Well, we have our eyes and ears open for the advice, and I do want to give a quick shout out to our first Lindenauer lecturer, Scott Wright, who's also a board member and lives with CP. But having folks with CP on many aspects of this organization is absolutely critical to our mission. So another question for you, Denise. What's your advice for the community on advocating for your own health care?
It's really important to claim your rights to be seen and heard and acknowledged. Also to have somebody in your network and your circle to talk over what's going on, to reach out to friends and to make connections with other people with disabilities, because they have another perspective, but they also have different experiences.
Yeah, I think that's key to have that connection. And I think, Cara, you spoke about this earlier about having connections with other folks with CP. We've tried to do that through our young adult support groups and other methods, but there's nothing like the information, the support that comes from that. Cara, the next question is for you. CP is one of the most common disabilities, as you said earlier, and as the questioner is asking. How can we form a more centralized CP movement?
What I'm really passionate about is self-advocacy, and we've seen the self-advocacy movement grow and transform over the past 50 years or so, and there's some great organizations run by and for people with disabilities out there. The National Council on Independent Living, where I work. I'm a particularly big fan of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. And one of my dreams is to really follow their example and to start a similar self-advocacy organization for people with CP, because currently there is no centralized national organization run by and for people with CP. There are some local groups that are doing some small conferences and things, but there's no big national organization. I think that's what we need. I think people with CP need to have our voices heard. I think we need to speak and communicate for ourselves and not have our parents or our caregivers speak on our behalves. And we really need to show the power of people with CP, because we are such a large group, and CP is one of the most common physical disabilities out there. I think if we connected with each other and we started advocating on our own behalves, I think it could really make a splash.
Well, we saw in Crip Camp, Denise and others, the moment that they at Camp Janad kind of came together and started the movement that ultimately bore the fruit of the ADA. And with that passionate answer, Cara, perhaps this is the moment that will launch the next self-advocacy movement for the civil rights. So one more question, this goes to you, Denise. If you were to speak to the CP community. What do you think their how would you advocate for them advancing the civil rights?
I would say that number one, although there are accommodations made in the ADA for communication, there are sign language interpreters and there's captioning. There's really no accommodation for people who have affected speech. So one of the things we need to do is make our voices heard and make our needs known. And that includes that when we think we're being left out or ignored, we need to say something. So I think that's really a vital thing we need to do. We need to learn to speak up for ourselves, because growing up, we've often had other people speak for us, and that's not the same as feeling the power of our own voice and being heard.
Well, I'm feeling the power of your voice being heard, Denise. And if you know, as you know, but maybe people on the webcast don't, one of the measures in the ADA was making sure that deaf people had communication devices so that they could use telephone for communication. And I think your point about, allowing people with disability affected speech to have a voice really is for productive language, sort of what that for receptive language was about. And hearing, but your point about hearing it straight from the person is couldn't be more clear. Cara, for sort of some again more sort of future oriented, what do you see as the main disability rights? You said we need more legislation, better legislation. What do you think that are the issues that the post-ADA generation want enacted that they feel like current law or current attitudes don't allow?
I think the biggest issue that we need to address, there are many issues that we can address in a post-ADA world. But I think the issue of accessing in-home services, and I know this is a passion of Denise's as well. Currently, the way the system is designed, you cannot receive in-home services via Medicaid and work without jeopardizing losing your benefits. And it's quite honestly a terrible system. And the way that legislation is worded, in-home services are not guaranteed under Medicaid. You have to get a waiver, and the waiting list for those waivers are very, very long. And so unfortunately, people end up in institutional care because they're not getting provided the services that could easily and more cheaply be provided to them at home. So really expanding access to in-home care, you know, codifying what was said in the Olmsted versus LC Supreme Court case that, you know, segregated placements, that institutionalization is a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, you know, making sure that everybody can live in their own homes and their own communities, just like anybody would want to live in their own homes and their own communities. And it's something I work towards every day in my job and in my personal life. So I think that's a big issue. And I think also abolishing sub-minimum wage, which is currently legal under Section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act. It's currently legal to pay sub-minimum wage to workers with disabilities. And in some cases that can be as low as pennies per hour. There's a lot of advocacy to abolish 14C, and a lot of states have made really great progress in supported employment and making sure that all workers are paid a fair wage, including workers with disabilities. But again, we still have a long way to go on the national level.
Great. Well, I think you know, there are some very concrete ways to continue to move the needle. Denise, what about, we just heard about sort of legislative actions that need to be taken. What about changes in attitudes?
People need to be made aware of the resources that are available. There are so many organizations that are out there that promote the attitudes to disability. For example, in healthcare, there's an organization called that made a series of videos about healthcare that are right up on their website. So anybody can take a look at them and get the information. I would also like to say within home support services, there's a shortage of good attendant care assistants. Personal assistance for people with disabilities are different than caretakers. And so one of the things I would love to see is a collaboration between the disability community and between colleges and universities, where students are going into helping profession that they could get credit by working as a personal assessment for somebody with a disability?
Well, so 2 points in response. So some of the references, like Denise's reference to the disability in healthcare website, we're going to have on our website, along with the recording of the Lindenauer lecture. And I think it's an outstanding idea, not only to promote college students to work with people with disabilities, but also to elevate that as a specific kind of study that can benefit them and the people they ultimately end up serving. So Cara, just the very last question here. As you imagine kind of the abilities or the resources that people in the next generation will have, how do you see that being different? What do you see as the new opportunities?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the internet. And as a millennial, I'm sort of on the cusp of that. When I was growing up, we had message boards and AOL Instant Messenger and things like that. And actually, the first fellow person that I ever met with CP, when I was 8 years old, I was having a bit of a rough time. I had I was sort of mature enough to realize that I was always going to have CP and that I was always going to be this way, and I was feeling very lonely and feeling very different. So my mother actually found a message board oriented towards kids with CP and encouraged me to reach out there, and I did, and I connected with a boy there who was my age, who has had a similar level of CP to me. We found out later that he was also a New Yorker and his family lived upstate, and that his grandparents lived on Long Island. And so there were actually a lot of connections there. And he's still one of my very close friends to this day. I just watched him do an improv comedy show the other night on Zoom. So I think now that we have things like Facebook and social media, it's easier than ever for people with disabilities and for people with CP to find each other. And I, as someone who created a very large group for people with CP on Facebook called You Know You Have CP When, I've seen people stumble upon our group just searching for CP and really finding those connections. And a lot of people haven't had those connections before. So I think the internet is really going to allow people to meet each other and mobilize in a way that my generation sort of started. But, Generation Z and the generation that comes after them, they grew up with this technology. And so they're going to be much more comfortable using it and finding new creative ways to connect with each other and to really form that next frontier of the movement.
Fantastic. So we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank Denise Jacobson and Cara Liebowitz for an enlightening and elevating Lindenauer lecture. Many thanks to Dr. and Mrs. Lindenauer for your generous and gracious support. Together with Debbie and Peter Weinberg, you enable us to do our important work. And many thanks to the many people at Columbia who made this possible. From the CP Center, I want to shout out to Jan Moskowitz and Christina Coleman. From Development, I want to thank Matt Ehrlich and Heather Messina. This lecture will be available along with answers to other questions on the Weinberg Family CP Center website. Thank you so much for attending this year's Lindenauer lecture. Good night.